Hello, and welcome to the Argyle CFO Leadership Forum. My name is Brittany Sullivan with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. I have some important information to share with you, and then we will turn the floor over to our esteemed opening keynote speaker. First, we would like to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, UiPath. Our sponsor is committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. At any time during today's event, you can visit their virtual booth from the main agenda page, which includes complimentary materials, information, and meet and greet opportunities. We also welcome you to stay socially connected during today's event. For those of you who are active on social media, please use the hashtag ArgyleDigital and follow us at Argyle Exec Forum. Also, be sure to subscribe to Argyle on YouTube for exclusive access to all of our past events. Finally, and most importantly, we would love to hear from you. So during each session, we encourage you to submit your questions and comments in the Q&A box on your screen. Following each presentation, we have set aside time for our speakers to weigh in on your questions. Thank you again for joining us. Now let's get started. Without further ado, I would love to introduce Matt Poleski, Regional Chief Financial Officer at Arthur J. Gallagher. We are excited to have Matt with us for his opening keynote titled The Influential Finance Leader, Blending Bayesian Adaptability, Statistical Rigor, and Strategic Storytelling. Welcome, Matt, and over to you.
Okay. Well, hello, everybody. I'm honored to be here today to share a couple of things that we're kind of currently working through, really the Bayesian approach to statistics versus the classical historic and how it all plays in. We actually influence people with stories. So honored to be here, and I'll get started here. So agenda here, kind of talk about my role is what I do in finance and how I'm the financial navigator, financial coach, really more kind of a coach than anything to make sure we're making good decisions. Then approach to statistics, the Thomas Bayes principle versus Ronald Fisher. We'll go through that a little bit. And then just look at kind of some probability and decision making under pressure, like what are we doing? And then we'll get into some applications, some tools that we use, and some frameworks that allow us to apply these principles. Okay. So what's my goal as a finance person? It's really to help, like we get measured, it's 15% EBITDA growth. Like that's the toll. And it's like, how do you do that? Business is a bet. Making money requires risk. So like, but everybody wants dollars and they want guarantees. They don't want to deal with uncertainty. They want a guarantee. So profits are uncertain, but we need dollars for investments, right? So our biggest constraint on investments is the ability to grow our revenue. So as I'm coaching our team, I'm always looking at, well, what's our model? Our biggest constraint is how much can you grow the revenue? Because that creates more available investment dollars. And if those investments pay off, I get higher revenue growth. If they don't pay off, I get lower revenue growth. So key takeaway here is when revenues go up in a sustainable manner, we have more dollars that we can distribute. When we don't make good bets, our revenue goes down. That actually chokes our stuff. So actually making good bets is really important. Okay. So what's the probability forecasting and decision making? And I'm just, imagine you were a forecaster, and I don't know how many of you are football fans, but for the Chicago Bears. So let's look at some of their, ESPN does now these in-game probabilities. You see FanDuel, all the stuffs. So look, there's 2 minutes left to go into the Bears game. And there's a 99.1% chance that Green Bay is going to win. And what do you know what happens? It's like, well, this is our model. So if you're forecasting, you're going to say, well, I'm going to bet all my money on Green Bay at this point because that's a really safe bet. But the reality is the game didn't play out that way. And all of a sudden it's like, okay, it drops. And then it's like, well, Chicago scored 10 points in 2 minutes and then they scored a touchdown in overtime. Game's over. So my forecast was off. Or didn't come to fruition that way. So then a couple weeks later, Bears are playing the Packers again. And you look at this, you're forecasting the probability here, and you're looking through, you're doing all your analysis, and it's the same thing. My model says there's a 90% chance that Green Bay is going to win. And then what happens? Well, if this is the probability and it's happened twice in my sample size, is this really a good probability or is that just luck? What is it? And then it happens again. Bears are playing the Rams, and this time there's a 90% chance the Rams are going to win. And then Chicago comes back on the last play of the game, and all of a sudden it flips, and it looks like Chicago's going to win. But now it went back the other way, and then the Rams won. So, like, trying to forecast and understand things, everybody thinks there's certainty. There's a lot of precision luck. And so this is a really good book that I've recently read. It just came out, The Art of Uncertainty, How to Navigate Chance, Ignorance, Risk, and Luck. And the reality is there's a science to how we do all this luck and probability stuff, but it's not all the same. And uncertainty is personal. We need to connect with our leaders. Then putting numbers to uncertainty, that makes everybody feel better. Saying there's a 99% chance Green Bay is going to win, I mean, who knows if that's the right number or not, but people feel better when they have numbers. So we give numbers to frame stuff. We use probability, but probability, nobody really knows the future. And it's not really a certain ratio or whatever. There are surprises and coincidences. There are lucks. And this book goes into a lot of this. And it's like, well, when you flip a coin, everybody thinks it's 50-50, but flip 10 coins. You're not going to get 5 and 5, even though those are the odds. So understanding we're navigating uncertainty and we're making decisions and bets, and that's how you run businesses. So then let's get into the Fisher approach to statistics. And this is what you all studied in college. It's classical statistics that's used in clinical trials with pharmaceutical companies. Here's how things get approved. We have random samples, p-values, confidence intervals, test weather data, and it's useful in a regulated, legal, and compliance settings. But then we get into the real world, and we're in this world of AI and machine learning. Well, what is machine learning and AI really doing? It's really Bayes on steroids. It's taking stuff that we know, it's updating our beliefs. Every time we get new evidence, we update what we say, we learn as we go. And this is very useful in forecasting, decision making, gambling, making bets, because the world changes every day. We have to update our stuff every day. We don't live in a static world. So as we look at Bayesian statistics, in short, it's like conditional probability. It's like, given that I know something, how am I forecasting what it's going to be? How am I updating my forecast every time we do this? And I think it's really important in finance because not only are we just looking at the numbers that come in my role, we're also talking to people. And as we talk to people, we learn new information every day. And if we don't incorporate that new information that we're getting into our forecast, well, all forecasts are kind of wrong. Like, they're useful, but nobody can predict the future. So it's just how much are you off on? You can't get it right to the 10th of a percentage. So it's like, how do we make our forecast useful? And I always use this 9/11 example to explain kind of Bayes, because I remember, 25 years ago when 9/11 hit, the first plane hit the tower. If you use a purely statistical model, it had been 12,500 days since there was an accident involving a plane in New York at a building. So let's say there's a 1 out of 12,500 chance. There had never been a terrorist attack. So never happens, never going to happen. So it's like, well, that doesn't seem very likely. Why would someone fly a plane into a building? So just using a Bayesian approach, you're saying, well, it's 38% chance it was terrorist, 62% accident. Then new information. The next tower is hit. You're updating your presentation, your calculation here. You're like, well, it's definitely terrorist because the odds of it being 2 accidents are basically 0. So this is how you use Bayes, and this is what AI is doing. It's collecting new information. Every time it gets new information, it's updating our bets. And I think if we can incorporate some of that into our own thinking, we still need the human, and that's why AI makes mistakes. It's really just trial and error with a lot of stuff. It just goes a lot faster than a lot of us. Okay. So then we got to connect with our leaders and understand their bets. And our leaders, this is Daniel Kahneman. He's got 2 systems. He's got our instinct and intuition. This is like when you're very much relying on what your recency bias, all these heuristics, and you're making quick decisions, you're biased. And then system 2, well, this is when you're analyzing all the information. Well, if you analyze all the information, go to your leader, they typically don't have time. They want to make quick decisions. So it's like, how do we transform our information so we can kind of put it in a Bayesian way and, give them a story, give it within context, because that's how they're going to make better decisions that help us grow our profits, which is really what we're here to help them do. Okay. So then be key in making good bets, and the bigger the company you work for, you got to get everybody go in the same direction. This Patrick Lencioni triangle here, I've been using this for 20 years, and I think it's a great model because it's like, what's the first thing you have to do is build trust. And then you got to have some conflict. Once you have the conflict, now we can actually discuss the things that we disagree on, which will bring us to commitment. Then we can commit to something. We'll hold each other accountable, and when we do all these things, then we get results. So if we do all those things, what's missing? Well, last time, I mean, I always can hear, well, we get what we inspect, not what we inspect. There's no numbers and there's no certainty. So what do we do to this triangle? We can add some data and measure what people are doing to actually tell if it's working and giving them feedback. And this plays into the whole decisions under uncertainty. So then another thing, and this comes from another book that I've read, Loonshots by Safi Bikal, he really advocates for a chief incentives officer because incentives cause bias in investment requests and decisions. Like there's an agency problem where if they're not the owner, everybody has biases. So we need to understand what incentives employees have so we can manage them and make them aware and help mitigate any biases. And there's a case for, we're trying to do some of this role within our finance team, but how do you be a chief incentives officer? Incentives shape behavior more than strategy. Now, when you're dealing with lots of people, you work for a big company like I do, you kind of have to put in some lowest common denominator. It's easy to get general alignment like, well, we want to grow our revenue and we want to grow our EBITDA. We want to grow the top line, we want to grow the bottom line. That's good. But then different people are in different scenarios, so you have to customize it a little bit to get adaptive incentives. You do kind of have to make sure you're still using that human element to measure people and really getting a combination of both to make sure you are driving top line revenue, top line, bottom line growth. You got to drive those things. But how you do it, you kind of have to customize your incentives so people don't figure out how to work the system. Okay. So then another story I like to tell, it's like, look, like what we like to do, like let's say we have 3 scenarios. Scenario A, you got 3 lotto tickets. Each cost $1. The payoff is $100. Only one winner. Do you make the bet? Well, you should make the bet because you got for $1, you got an expected value of $33. The problem is there's a 67% chance you're going to lose. But if you make 3 bets, you're going to make $33 if things work out. Then you got scenario B. You got 10,000 lotto tickets. Each cost $1, but you only win $100. Well, do you make the bet? Well, you shouldn't make the bet. Now, the problem is if you have an outcome-based mindset, and this is what we do. We say, who are underperformers? Who are outperformers? Like what? They're saying, well, who won? Well, how did we win? Like make sure they reward. Well, if you won under scenario B, you just got lucky. If you lost under scenario A, you're doing the right thing and you're going to win over time. So understanding the process that we're going through, that's huge. So we keep going here. Let's tie all this together now and like kind of walk through. So kind of like, how do we use all this stuff to help make decisions? So like, look, every month, everybody asks for the income statement. You get this income statement, and this isn't statistics at all. This is just data. It's a bunch of data. Try to make sense of this. And what happens is if you just present data without actually framing the data, well, then the leader tries to, if they even make time for you, they try to understand like, well, why doesn't it tell me a coherent story? Like, why can revenues be up 29%, but the budget's down 40? Did we just do a bad budget? Like you've just undermined your own credibility with the budget. Your comp is up. Like, so make sure like you're not going to hide your income statement from your leader, but make sure you're giving them more than just the numbers. You're telling them what it means and how you measure them. So let's get in a little bit to how you do that. Okay, so start by simplifying the revenues and understanding growth rates. So let's say we got, $100 and it's growing 10%, which everybody likes 10% growth. Like that sounds like you're beating the market if you're growing 10%. But maybe we have 3 segments, and segment 1 is growing at 2%, segment 2 is growing at 27%, and segment 3 is growing at 5%. Well, just looking at the total isn't all that helpful because everyone's going to be like, this is great, like leave it alone, it's not broken, don't fix it. But the reality is we need to figure out how we are feeding segment 2 and maybe even divesting some of segment 1 or segment 3. Like, so let's make sure we're feeding the right things and we're looking at the right things within our business. Then we get into our expense drivers, and you look at this and it's like, okay, we need to know what are our levers? Like, okay, so if we stop underperforming, and typically for us, it's always in compensation, but we know how much have we got in commissions and accruals? How much do we have in hires? How much do we know in salaries? Really know your drivers. So let's see here, the wrong way. Okay, a little bit of limits in action here too. So like, so they're asking investment requests. This is where we keep trying to tell people, if you make good bets, it makes revenues go up. And it's not easy to do that. Execution is hard, but as you make good bets, you're going to get higher revenue growth, and that makes more investment dollars available. But just because everyone always treats us a little bit like an ATM. How much dollars do we have in the bank? Okay, we want to spend it. And it's a little more complicated than that, because if they make good bets, if they spend their money wisely, revenues go up. And let's say they really don't have any money and they have to put it on their credit card. Well, if you can get a 30% return on it, maybe it's still a good bet, and maybe we'll willing to go take a loan to get that money. So knowing all of this, it's kind of like playing Monopoly and knowing how much money you have in and how much you can spend, all good stuff. So let's switch a little bit into economics here. And here we're going to look at marginal revenues versus marginal cost. And really, this is a 2x2 matrix. It's like if your marginal revenue is higher than your marginal cost, and you got high marginal revenue, well, you're in the sweet spot. This is great. You're growing your revenues and you got plenty of reinvestment dollars. You got high growth, but you're doing it by overspending, well, then you're choking future investments. If you got low revenue, but you control your costs, well, then you're in a stable profitable zone. People probably leave you alone. You're okay, but you want to push to get up into that sweet spot. If you have low revenue growth and you're spending more than your costs are growing faster than your revenues, well, then you're in a danger spot where if that continues, well, you're going to have a hard time staying in business. So this is a good framework for our leaders. It's like, think about it when you got those marginal dollars, where are you going to spend them? So then going back to our growth rates here, it's like, look at, when we went to the other, segment one that was growing 2%, look how its mix decreases over time. So if you're feeding segment two, you're actually going to get higher growth rates. Segment three, and this is all about updating our predictions, figuring out what we're doing. So know how to segment your revenues and know your individual growth rates. Then we're going to segment our comp here, break it out, and this is like, think back to like the Chicago Bears analogy. Like you're ranking your players, you want all-stars, but you got to pay the all-stars the most. Then you got role players, they're a little bit more affordable, you got development, but every year you got to have some cuts, you got to move some people around, you got to put the best team on the field. So always kind of looking at how do we evaluate our talent and our team, how do we continuously upgrade it, make the tough calls while creating a nice environment for people to grow their careers in. Really important that we understand what's making up this, because this really is our levers. And then let's get into monitoring. So like we go in here and we're like, okay, we're in June. We plan to be in the top. We're growing 10%. Then we got our comp growing 8%. We're like, we're planning all good. We got all this stuff. Then it's like in July, there's some unexpected thing. We lost an account. Then we needed to spend some more money on comp. So all of a sudden you look at my remaining year and it's like, well, still a pretty good year. We're going to grow our revenues 8%, but our comp's going to go up 9%. I mean, still 7, 8, but it's like, okay, now we've like split from quadrant 1 to quadrant 2. So we need to make some adjustments. Just like in a football game, you need to make some audibles at halftime. You need to make your adjustments. So knowing like something happened, and this is very easy not to pay attention to the minutia detail, because you're like, I still got good numbers. Why are you? But you flip now, and this is knowing how to use these quadrants is actually really important, because then you can facilitate discussions that people are going to understand, as opposed to just, well, you feel like finance is complaining all the time. So then we go into detailed revenue monitoring regularly. Here's exactly how we lost the account. Like we're always looking at like what's our new business versus lost versus retention, knowing your metrics here, and really looking at this not just where you are, but where you're going to be and what your forecast is, and then continuously updating. And this is what's really important to know what my outlook is, because depending on your outlook, that's going to depend like how you run your team. Okay. Same thing with comp monitoring. Here's you got your changes on commission, changes on raises. So like if you're monitoring all this stuff, again, like these are my key metrics. So like I have a P&L, but when I support the P&L, I'm kind of showing what are my drivers here. So people, it breaks it down, makes it very understandable. And when I spent money, what happened, where did it change? Like explaining a little bit behind like that pure P&L, very important. Okay. So we'll get into a couple of extra tips here. And this is always like the protagonist buyers formula. Like it's like anytime you go in, if you don't think about, even though you're in accounting and finance, if you don't know how to sell your information, you get rejected a lot. And even when I do, like I get rejected a lot anyways. But anytime you introduce an idea, always establish yourself as an expert. I deal with this kind of thing all the time. Let me help. Then you kind of outline some obvious ways where it could fail, highlight some counterintuitive ways, list your obvious actions and some hacks. Then you can hand over autonomy. You can say like, look, don't tell people what to do. Just say, if you want my advice, I'll give it to you, but I'm not your boss. You can make decisions, you own it. And like, there are some times where you have to tell people what to do because there's a corporate mandate. But a lot of times you want to encourage people they have to own their P&Ls. They have to own their decisions. Well, if you don't let them own anything, you just have to tell them, like, if you do this, it's going to make both of us look bad. And then we got to redirect to establish some boundaries. So I think this is a really good framework here. Some other with the system mindset, keep asking why. How can decision-making processes be improved? How do we identify teams with an outcome mindset and help them adopt a system mindset? Use soft equity, like praise, like this is my operant conditioning. Like the more, if you want people to change, balance your good news with your bad news, give a lot of praise, catch them doing something right, reward them, give them immediate feedback when they're not doing stuff right, do it in a supportive way, identify your perverse incentives, mind your system 2 errors, and then like listen to like when it's not working, listen to the suck with curiosity. Be open to feedback. Don't think that you're perfect and the whole world's against you. Listen when people are against you. Okay. So a little bit, just kind of wrap up here. Statistics and stories, like this is again with the Bayes versus the Fisher, should enable data to answer specific questions. Signals always come with noise. So when you're measuring stuff, you got to look at bigger time frames. You got to make sure that you're filtering out your noise. You got to plan ahead, really ahead, avoid researchers' degrees of freedom. Like there's always bias in numbers. Be careful, make sure you're measuring the right stuff. Worry about your data quality. Big world of big data, there's almost too much data now, and a lot of it is meaningless. You got to make sure you got the right data quality. Statistical analysis is more than a set of computations. Knowing why you're using a formula and if it's the right formula, because a lot of times, like people will want to focus on measuring a formula, and we got the wrong formula. So don't be afraid to say like, hey, maybe I got the wrong formula, as opposed to defending that you calculated it with the formula you were supposed to use. Sometimes we got to revamp the formulas. Keep it simple. Don't show up. The more complex you make it, the less credibility you're going to have. People aren't going to understand you. Provide assessment of variability, confidence intervals. Check your assumptions. If not possible, make sure you disclose it. Replicate and make your answer reproductive. So here's some companies that failed to interview, but I feel like if we want to switch now to questions, happy to take any questions. And thanks for listening.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Matt, for such an insightful presentation. As a reminder, audience members can still enter questions, and we'll go ahead and review a few that came through. Matt, this first question asks, where do you think finance teams struggle more, adapting fast enough or being confident enough to act?
I think it's being confident enough to act and making sure that we've done our homework before we act, because I always think about being on a chessboard as opposed to checkers. The minute you act, there's going to be a retaliation. So are you going to be able to handle that follow-up question? But I think, so thinking things through and knowing for every action, there's a reaction.
Great, thank you. And have you ever delayed a decision waiting for better data that never really came?
Um, I mean, sometimes people want to stall. So what happens is when people aren't comfortable making a decision, they will always ask for better data. And I think that's where we got to make sure that we're not just doing the same thing over and over again when they're just stalling, right? So I think there's an art there to making sure that, we keep them focused on what are the real drivers and focus on things that matter as opposed to a lot of people like to deflect.
Great, thank you. And we have a couple more questions. If you had 60 seconds to explain your forecast to a non-finance leader, what would you focus on?
Oh, so I would always focus on what my change in revenues, what's my new business versus my lost business. What are those rates? Because if you're writing more new than you're losing, that's good. And then how am I keeping my cost in line with my revenue growth?
Perfect. And one last question to close us out. Where do finance teams most often miss the mark when presenting analysis to leadership?
I think when you're presenting to leadership, the first thing is always start with empathy. You have to know what leadership is looking for and make sure you've tailored your presentation to their expectations. And then you have to know, like, is the information you're going to present, is that going to meet their present expectations? Is it going to disappoint them? Like, what are they going to use your information for? And then anticipating what they're going to do with it. That's how you become a strategic partner, as opposed to just kind of being a trusted partner. Like, that's the big difference. When you're a strategic partner, they actually ask your advice on strategy. When you're trusted, they trust you to deliver credible numbers.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much again, Matt. That is all the time we have for questions. But I also wanted to thank everyone else for joining us today. This session, along with all of today's content, will be made available on demand following the event. Our next session will begin shortly, so please click the join button that will appear on your screen to be redirected, and we look forward to seeing you there. Thank you again, Matt.
Thank you.